Owners, I'm Matt the Jerk here with your weekly breakdown video. Today we're going to be talking about the Minnesota Vikings. So a few players I want to talk about today. We're going to kind of go through this pretty quick. 4 players: quarterback, back, and tight end that we're going to talk about. This week we're starting a new division. Obviously, we're going to be talking about the NFC North. So I started my article by talking about some of the bigger offseason news things that have broke that down a little bit. I'm not going to get into it on the video because we're talking about these players. But then I also talked about how the division shaped up and from a real life standpoint, like how the teams fared and what happened. So that's the very beginning of my article. Then once you start getting to the meat of it, we're going to be talking some contract breakdowns like we usually do. So first up, we're going to talk about Kirk Cousins. Really not much to talk about, not even really that relevant for Dynasty owner, but he's their starting quarterback, so we're going to talk about him. He quarterback. I truly believe that. Some people might disagree, but he can do what other average quarterbacks can't do. He hasn't won a lot in his NFL career, and that's a big part of it as well. But for us as dynasty owners, he's semi-productive. He's middle of the road production, and that's one of the problems that we face when we talk about drafting Kirk Cousins or even owning him at all. So he attempted the 15th fewest passes, 15th most, I guess, either way you want to say it, 15th most passes in the NFL in 2020. So that's not great. We obviously know that the Vikings are a low volume offense passing. They like to run the ball. So that being said, his completion percentage, passing yards, and passing touchdowns were at 10 for the 2020 season. So he's efficient when he does get the opportunity to pass. It's just his overall value is down. And then the other thing that is going to be the downside for Cousins, which is the biggest one, if his salary was half of what I wouldn't say he'd be a steal in Dynasty owner, but he'd be much more valuable. And you could say that about any player. I get that. But definitely for him, so he has a top level salary. And, that amount of money from Mahomes, Josh Allen, Russell Wilson, all 3 of those that I just mentioned are top tier, top 5 quarterbacks. Cousins is not. He's right middle of the road. As I already said, he's right around 10 to 15th. So that's just not going to get it done. And I've said this many times since I've been doing these videos and articles that there's no value when you mix that with middle of the road production. It just doesn't happen. It's a recipe to lose year after year. You have to have those high value players in order to take on those bigger contracts later. So take it for what it is. Kirk's only owned in less than 1% of Dynasty owner leagues, so it's kind of a moot point. Hardly anybody even owns him, so don't be rushing out to go pick him up. There's going to be a player that probably have a cheaper sell. If they don't, they're going to be more productive. At least, speculating that they will be. Dalvin Cook, I've talked quite a bit about him, especially over my running back rankings. So I'm not going to talk about Cook. I'm going to talk about his backup, Alexander Madison. So he's not talked about as much as he should be. It's kind of a little misleading production of the first couple of years, but he also hasn't had much playing time, obviously, with Cook is for sure the better back. So I went back and I looked at his stats. So I looked at all the games that Madison had 10 carries or more in, and he only had 8 in his career. So he said a 2-year career, only 8 games in his career did he have 10. This is what his games look like in those 10-plus carries. And per game, he was getting 14.5 carries of those games with over 10 carries, 17.5 yards, and then pretty close to half a touchdown per game. Not great numbers, not terrible, but I would say it's pretty good for a backup running back. We've seen when Madison has come in for Cook, either at the end of games. I think he came at the end of the season, week 7, played. Whether it be injury or whatever it is, he's capable. They're both very capable running backs if their lead back goes down. So he's a big handcuff that I would advise people to pick up, trading for, drafting this year. He has 2 years left on his rookie contract. It's worth a little less than $900,000. It's a steal. If something happens to Cook, God forbid, then he's going to be an extreme value, and he's going to be – you might even want to trade him if that happens. If something like that happens, Then we're going to talk about Adam Thielen. He's the one to talk about. I thought about talking about Justin Jefferson, but we kind of hit on him pretty hard in the wide receiver article a few weeks ago. So Thielen had a roller coaster 2020 season. He failed to tally 10 fantasy points in 6 of the 15 games he played in. Not great, but he kind of made up for that stat, finishing where he did at the end of the season. He had 4 games with multiple touchdowns. So he had 2 touchdowns. And he also scored in 10 of his 15 games. So he was very reliable, catching at least 1 touchdown for the year. There was only 5 games that he didn't. It's no secret. Thielen, he's 30 years old. He's starting to reach the declination point of his career, or at least the average age where wide receivers tend to fall off. There's actually a chance that he's already passed it. He might have already had his best seasons behind him. Could be likely even. So I assume that the age thing is one of the reasons he's dropped in fantasy dynasty ownership. So he's only 92% owned right now. I guess that's probably fair. If I had the salary room, or if I had a wide receiver that I didn't like so much that had a high salary, I would be dropping them to pick up Thielen. I don't expect another 14 touchdown season, but even with some of the regression that he's probably going to have, he's still going to be a top 20 wide receiver overall in fantasy points. So, and then, take that for what it's worth. But I've told you guys that I like to spend on my wide receivers late. So Thielen would fit that bill. He has an ADP right now at this recording of 136. That's too low. He needs to be higher than that, especially if you are getting those early running backs and waiting on wide receivers. So the final player I want to mention, I talked about him quite a bit last week, is Irv Smith Jr. So just mention him. He's their tight end. Looks to be the future tight end, for that organization. We'll see if that actually plays out. He's got 2 more years left on his rookie contract. The deal is worth a little less than $1.5 million per year. We already talked about it. The Vikings are a low passing offense. And he's going to be the 3rd or 4th receiving option at best. Probably the 4th, because you're going to have Cook, you're going to have Thielen, you're going to have Jefferson. So he's looking to be about the 4th on a low-volume passing team. Age and salary are going to be the benefits to drafting him or to picking him up. I wouldn't expect him to catapult to top 5, tight end in terms of fantasy points. That's just not going to happen. But if we're talking about value, I think he could reach top 5. Cheap contracts. Tight end landscape, I mentioned it hundreds of times. It's just so barren these days that if you get a tight end that's average and he's got a low salary, that's what you want. He's probably not going to win your league. He'd be a good bench tight end, but if you can have that type of value and then pair him with a high salary tight end, you'll be sitting pretty good, at least in that position. So that's it. That's really all that I want to talk about. I'll kind of rip through this pretty quick this week. Next week, I'll be bringing you another team from the NFC North, and we'll do some more breakdowns. So I appreciate everybody coming in and listening. Take care and be safe.